What does technology mean to you? I feel like these days when we talk about technology, we think about smartphones and screens and internet and very kind of digital media kind of technology, but actually it's a term that encompasses so much more. It encompasses basically all of the tools we've ever developed as a species in the entirety of our evolution to make our life more convenient and more comfortable, basically. And so many of us have kind of dipped our toes into the water of relinquishing digital media, of, stepping back from social media, spending more time away from our phones and our screens. And we're definitely kind of starting to see the need for that. But what about relinquishing other forms of technology? What if you had the opportunity to try a life that didn't encompass any of those technologies at all, that really try to move away from all of that? What would that look like? And do you think that it would help you to live closer to nature? Do you think that it would help you to feel closer to the natural world, to feel more alive and to feel more human? Like many of you, I have been following an earth-based spiritual path for a long time now. I've been following this kind of path for 15 years on and off, but I still feel like I don't really have a proper answer to what that really means and to how kind of earth-based or nature-based my spirituality really is, and to what extent you can have an earth-based path that is unfolding mostly inside a building, inside your room, at an altar full of human-made objects that are supposed to represent things that are happening outside in the natural world. And this is definitely an issue that I've kind of come up against again and again in my own mind. And I know that for a lot of us, we do make an effort to be outside in nature, to be in wild places, and that to make that kind of a part of our practice. Some of us, if we're lucky enough, we might manage to do practice or ritual outside, actually among the elements, rather than being inside all of the time. But I know if you're like me, that element to our practice is often quite limited. So for quite a few years now, ever since I started going back to Kerry, which kind of coincided with when I was getting back into my spiritual practice in my early to mid-20s, and it's a rural, very much farmland kind of area, but to a city girl it's very much rural, it's very much a wilderness compared to what I'm used to. And ever since I started going back there again every year as an adult again, because I spent a lot of time there in my childhood, I have had this kind of vague dream of sometime in the future. I have this dream of being able to spend more time down in Kerry at the house that we own there, and living a lot more kind of in tune with the land and being able to grow a lot of my own food and maybe kind of raise animals, or just have a very different kind of lifestyle that where I kind of become more and more self-sustaining, I guess. I recently read a book called The Way Home by Mark Boyle, and it really reminded me, first of all, of this vague dream that I've had for years, of living in this way, of living in this alternative kind of closer to the earth kind of way. But it also really demonstrated to me how far I really am away from that way of life, and really how much of a sacrifice and how different of a way of life it actually is or would be. So the whole premise of the book is for Mark to follow along and describe his experience of living without technology. And I'll let that sink in, like living completely without technology. We're not talking some sort of digital cleanse, digital fast kind of thing here where he, goes off social media for 30 days and, doesn't look at his phone so much, or even lives without a phone or without a laptop. We're talking about somebody who decided to live entirely without technology, and he pretty much drew the line of technology from the Industrial Revolution onwards for an entire year. And as far as I know, as far as the reader can know, he has been living in that way ever since. So first of all, Mark is an unusual person in that he had already taken steps towards this way of living beforehand, and there's no way that you could do this just out of the blue. There's no way you could just sit down one day and say, right, okay, I'm going to stop living without technology completely. And this book makes that just so clear. So he was already living on a rural kind of homestead. He was already, I think, growing quite a lot of his own food. He had already stopped using money and managed to learn how to live without money previously. So obviously he was somebody who was used to, being kind of sustaining and just being very self-reliant and resourceful with basically the things that he was able to acquire, you know, and he obviously probably had acquired a lot of skills in terms of being able to make tools and grow food and so on. So obviously all of that is kind of a prerequisite to even being able to live without technology, because we're talking without running water, without electricity, never mind things like the internet and so on. So, your first question might be, why? Why would he do this? Why would anybody want to do this? And I felt like for him it was two-pronged. That on the one hand, it was an ethical stance, that he clearly very, very strongly believes that ever since the Industrial Revolution in particular, that humans have been kind of living in a way that is less and less ethical, that is inflicting suffering on more and more humans and animals and plants and the planet as a whole, and that the only ethical way to live is by stepping back completely away from this industrialized capitalist society and just endeavoring to live in a way that you're not consuming anything that has been created through these very destructive means. And I definitely don't disagree with that, but I'll kind of get a little bit more into my disagreements and agreements maybe later on in the video. And then second of all, I would say it was more of a kind of, selfish, not in a negative way, but a more selfish desire to reconnect with the earth. So he clearly not only believes that this is unethical, the way that we're living today, the kind of conveniences that we have created for ourselves, it not only is created through very unethical means, but he believes that also living in this way has basically stripped us of our own kind of humanity. Like, it's stripped us of everything that makes us human, and that we, by making our lives more comfortable, that we are losing all of the experiences that to him is real life. And there's very much this sense that he believes that all the years that he has spent and that other people spend kind of living in houses, living with running water and electricity and with all of these kind of modern technologies, that we have been kind of insulating ourselves and wrapping ourselves up in a bubble. And basically the more kind of these comforts, kind of daily comforts that we have, the more insulated we are from real life, from nature, and from the kind of real experience of what it is to be human. So I would say that I find his ethical argument the most convincing. I don't think that there's anything in particular in here that he's saying that I disagree with. I definitely don't think that the way that we live is ethical. I don't think that the way that we treat the planet is ethical, and it leads to human suffering and to animal suffering. And yeah, I agree. The problem for me is how do you roll that back, and how do you even begin to live in a way that might remedy that? And there's the obvious kind of argument that you can make against what he has done, which is to say that ultimately he's not actually going to make a huge difference. He's making a difference in his own life, and he's kind of dissipating his own guilt, I guess, by not buying into the systems that he sees as being so destructive. But ultimately, by living completely off the grid and by being completely self-sustaining and living in this completely technology-free way, is he actually going to be making a big difference? I would argue that the biggest difference he's probably going to make in terms of changing minds and changing our culture and making like big picture change actually happen is through the book that he's written. But ironically, he actually struggles a lot, especially towards the end of the book, with the decision to actually write this book in the first place, especially because he realises, having handwritten the entire manuscript with a pencil, because he won't even use pens, he realises that he's going to have to type up the manuscript if it's actually going to ever see the light of day. And he struggles with the decision to actually do this and thinks that he may never do this again. And does decide for that reason that he knows that the greatest impact he can have is through his words as a writer. But I think it's still interesting that his very ethical stance very almost stopped him from being able to share this message with other people, or with a significant amount of other people. I thought that was really interesting, and I definitely found his message to be maybe a little bit discouraging. he kind of struggles a lot throughout the book with, I mean, he already seems to be living in such an extreme way from, you know, my perspective or any other urbanized person who's living in a city, or just in general living, especially in the West, living with modern technology. His way of life seems very extreme. It's a totally different way of living, and yet he spends the book at various intervals wondering about, for example, his bike. Does he want to keep cycling? How does he feel about cycling? And he considers that he would like to maybe be able to walk places, but the problem is that due to the changed environment that he lives in, you know, he can no longer no longer survive by being a hunter-gatherer, for example, because the land is just barren by comparison to how it would have been at the time when we were living as hunter-gatherers. And just in order to survive, he actually needs to be able to move across great distances, and also in order to be able to see other people. Because of the area that he lives in, that it's rural, so, you know, the people in his neighborhood are quite scattered, and so, you know, to be able to travel tens of kilometers every day by foot is kind of unfeasible. And yeah, he even starts to wonder about the pencil that he's using to write with. Not only is the writing process for him problematic because he ends up having to use a computer for a few weeks to type up the manuscript, but also even using a pencil and writing on paper, that becomes problematic too, because once you get to that point where you're just trying to break down all the different technologies and every single tool that he's using, he starts to question. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. It really shines a light on just how much we are contributing to the problem by living our lives just in a very ordinary way. But it also, just like I say, it does feel ultimately a bit discouraging in that you kind of come away from the book feeling, or I came away from the book feeling a bit like, if I can't just relinquish all of technology, am I doing it wrong? Like, am I failing to really get back to nature in any significant way? Am I really kidding myself if I just kind of grow my own food, eat vegetarian or mostly vegan, if I recycle, if I, you know, try and reduce my single-use plastics? Like, you kind of feel like, am I really just kidding myself? And am I really not living in a very different way at all to your average person? So then I do ultimately have kind of two major questions about this. First of all, is living in this way necessary to be connected to nature and to live in a kind of ideal relationship with nature? And second of all, is this actually the path to happiness? Like, for him, this is his path to happiness, and he claims to feel happier and more alive than he ever has, and the less that he relies on technology, on any kind of modern technology, the more alive and happy he feels. Whereas I am actually not convinced that that side of his reasoning applies to me and to a lot of other people. And I'm not sure what that says about his entire belief around just how much he demonizes modern technology and the way that we live our lives today. I had a very relevant question on a video recently from a friend, where she was asking, do I think that there was ever a time when we lived in kind of perfect harmony with nature? And I do think that as pagans we tend to idealize certain periods in history, and a lot of the time it is kind of unrealistic. For example, I mean, you know, this author, Mark Boyle, like I say, kind of drew the line at industrialization, and I think for a lot of pagans that also is where that line gets drawn. And the effort is to kind of move back to just before then, and that that was when the most destruction started to happen, and that's definitely true. I mean, I think it's very safe to say that all of the damage that has been wreaked on the ecosystem has largely been since the rise of industrialization. And as I mentioned, the pagan Wheel of the Year is very much an agricultural Wheel of the Year. It is very much harkening back to a time when agriculture was kind of our main way of being, and kind of an idealization of a farming life. But then there are a lot of people who go back further than that. I mean, the entire paleo movement is kind of evidence of a lot of people feeling like, no, you need to go back to before farming, and that farming was a very destructive kind of technology that was developed. This is also echoed in the book Sapiens, the author of which I can't currently remember, but that book was also arguing that basically we wreaked havoc on ourselves by starting to farm, that we were healthier when we were hunter-gatherers. So in terms of spirituality, of spiritual practice, I'm kind of left wondering, is there kind of this moral imperative to try and find a way of life or a way of looking at life and a way of experiencing life that is the closest to, say, a hunter-gatherer lifestyle or, early farming kind of lifestyle? Like, is that actually going to bring us a better and closer bond with the natural world? I think kind of yes and no, and I think it depends on how you define your natural world and how you define divinity of the earth and of the universe. And I think we have a tendency to really separate humans from nature and to not see them as intertwined because we have wreaked so much havoc on the ecosystem that keeps us alive. And I think, I don't know if it's just a cultural thing in the West or exactly what it is, but we have definitely developed this feeling of ourselves as being separate, this other thing to nature. And then there's this kind of tendency to sacralize nature. And I think that can be a very positive thing. I think it obviously has been very dangerous to forget that we are part of that system and to forget that actually, if we push that system too hard and if we damage it too much, that there will be irrevocable changes that are going to cause us and all the other all the other animals on this planet, huge harm. I think that is important to remember. It's important to tap into. And I think it is valuable spiritually. Having kind of spiritual and mystical experiences really does seem to hang on an experience of the transpersonal, having an experience that makes you feel connected to that perceived other of nature and kind of breaking down that boundary between the two. But also from a pantheist perspective, the human and the human created is also divine. It's also part of this kind of divine cosmic creation, and there's no getting away from that. And as much as clearly the results of what we've done on this planet so far has clearly been destructive to our environment, at the same time, I really struggle to imagine how it could have been any other way, unfortunately. We definitely seem to have it hardwired into us to strive for innovation, to strive for kind of technological advancement, and to strive to kind of try to master our environment, unfortunately. It does seem to be quite innate, and I'm not sure what it would look like, what the planet would look like, what we would look like if that weren't the case. Because ultimately the planet did create us. It created us just the way that we are, and we are part of this natural creation. I mean, would I take it all back? Like, would I wind it all back and erase all of the damage that we've done as a result of our technological innovations? I mean, I'd like to say yes, but I don't even really know what that would mean. I don't even really know what it would mean for us to be human if we hadn't turned out to be this very pushy and invasive species. It just seems to be part and parcel of the way that we have evolved. So therefore, in order to be fully human, I don't know if the only true human experience is one that is one full of discomfort, of having to engage in a lot of kind of physical labor and cultivating the land or hunter-gathering, food, and being constantly on edge in terms of trying to find your next food source, just being constantly kind of aware and in tune with the elements, with how the weather is going, and just being always aware of how the land is responding. I think that's a really beautiful thing. And I feel like so many of us are crying out for more of those kind of experiences. And I think Mark is onto something in that it's almost impossible for us to really engage with our surroundings, with our natural surroundings, in that kind of way unless we actually need to survive. It's very difficult to find the time and the motivation to be and to feel that engaged with our surroundings and to really be aware of the changing weather, of the changing seasons, of the way that the earth is responding to various different input. But I do think we have also got a lot of other conflicting desires that ultimately make us feel like we would rather put our time and energy into other projects rather than relinquish everything that modern technology has given us in order to go back to that kind of very kind of raw experience of life. I think it really is a very natural, innate human instinct to seek comfort for a start, to seek convenience, but also to want to kind of expand our minds and push our limits in terms of the way that we think, the way that we evolve our ideas, the way that we communicate with one another. I really do think that's very natural. And I personally, I thought about it and I thought, would I want to live without the internet, without a computer, without this kind of community that I've found online, and without being able to reach out to so many other people? And I just thought, I don't think I would. I don't think I would feel like I was living the kind of the best life, for want of a better phrase, my best life, if I wasn't able to have this amazing experience of engaging with so many people in a relatively easy way. Like, it's relatively easy to get online and talk to hundreds, if not thousands of people, and to feel like you're making a difference in that many other people's lives. And I don't feel like I would have that same satisfaction. Like, maybe my interpersonal relationships one-on-one would be more satisfying. Maybe I would put more effort into them if I really only had a kind of small group of, say, 100 individuals in my immediate surroundings that I could ever interact with. I don't know, maybe I would get more out of those relationships, and maybe I wouldn't feel the need to be expressing myself online and putting myself out there for more people to hear and to share. But, I do think Mark obviously has this impulse too, because he did ultimately decide to type up this manuscript and to share it with the world, and to put it into print, and to have other people hear his thoughts and hear his experiences. And I really do think that is a very innate human desire, and it is one of the big reasons why we have evolved the way we have. And sure, the desire for more comfort and more convenience has come at a huge, huge cost. It comes at the cost of the comfort and convenience of the people who are not benefiting from this system. And it comes at the cost of ravaging the earth that we rely on. So obviously it's not ideal, and I would be the first to call for radical change. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure, having really looked myself in the eye and asked myself this question, I'm not sure that I would want to live without technology. I'm not sure that it would create my happiest version of myself. So yeah, I guess I might never really have an answer to this, to whether from a kind of selfish perspective, whether living in this way really is the only way to go. But I suspect not for me. But maybe as I get older, maybe I will move a little bit closer to that kind of lifestyle, maybe a tiny bit. I'm not exactly sure how my life is going to pan out. But I really do love the idea, at least, of growing a lot of my own vegetables, maybe moving towards growing the majority of my own vegetables in the future. But even that is just so far down the line. It requires a lot of skill, learning, and preparation and planning, and trial and error, and all of these different things that I want to bring into my life in order to be more kind of self-sustaining. Is, it's a lot of work. And ultimately I wish that I could come up with ways that we could maybe rely a little bit less on technology. And I do think that with more and more people turning away from social media and wanting to spend less time on their phones and looking at screens, there definitely is an impulse towards at least taking baby steps towards this kind of thing, and trying to make time for being outside more. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I definitely feel better. I definitely feel better when I'm not on social media all the time. I definitely feel better when I get to spend time outside, when I grow plants, when I tend a garden, when I go for walks, especially time spent in places of real wilderness, which are very few and far between in Ireland and the UK, but woods, kind of untamed woods, that's basically the closest that we can get with very, very little of it. But being in those spaces definitely, it fills me up in a way that nothing else does. So I don't know. I think if I could find a happy balance between the two, and if I could choose which technologies to use and which to not bother with, I would personally take the hit on my comfort and convenience. I think it would definitely be a hard slog, but I think if I could come up with a way to balance the benefits of the kind of interconnectivity that we have attained, and the convenience in terms of like time saving that we have managed to achieve. I think if I could find a balance between the two things, then I definitely would. And it's going to be something that I'm going to be thinking about going forward. And especially in terms of how this interrelates with my spiritual practice. And I have had some experiences recently of meditating outside, meditating in woods, and doing spiritual practice outside in places where there's no other humans around. And it's definitely a very different experience. And I would never want to relinquish the sense of artistry that comes with creating an altar and creating a ritual. I really think it's artistic expression, and that's another very innate part of human nature, a desire to express one's experience of life. And I would never want to relinquish that entirely, but I would love to move more towards being outside and practicing my spirituality and feeling more like it makes more sense in that environment, because it's supposed to be earth-based. It's supposed to be about connecting to the natural world. And sometimes it can feel very hypocritical to be living a very urban life and one of great convenience while purporting to be an earth-based spiritual practitioner. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It's a messy topic. There is much to be said. I've kind of come back to this topic again and again over the years on the channel, talking about the relationship between my spirituality and environmentalism and that kind of stuff. So I'll kind of link some of them up above if you're interested, if I remember to. But yeah, please do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are so inclined, I would highly recommend reading this book by Mark Boyle. I feel like I've been a little bit hard on it in this video. But the reason I wanted to make this video in the first place was because I loved the book so much. He's a wonderful writer for a start. I absolutely love his writing style. And it was a really, really fascinating read. It was a really, really thought-provoking and inspiring while also being discouraging, which is kind of strange. But yeah, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, then absolutely do give it a look. Probably the best book, the most thought-provoking book I have read in a very long time. So yeah, thanks a million for watching as always, and do give a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will talk to you again soon.